The prisoner transport docked at Station Vorath 9 with a loud metallic clang that rang through every corridor of the facility. Commander Veth Kal stepped forward with his hands folded behind his back and watched through the wide observation window as the human prisoners were pushed through the docking tube one by one. There were 8 of them. They came from a small human frigate called the Arden Cross that the Dominion fleet had intercepted near the Outer Reach 3 days ago. The humans had fought back harder than expected for a crew that small, but in the end, their ship had been disabled, and their resistance had meant nothing. Veth Kal had expected more from them based on some of the rumors that occasionally circulated through the lower fleet ranks. But the rumors always turned out to be exaggerated. He had learned that a long time ago. He watched them shuffle forward now, and felt nothing but mild satisfaction. 8 humans in gray station suits that were already torn and stained. The tallest one had a bloody cut above his eye that had dried into a dark crust. A shorter man near the back was holding his left arm against his chest with a tight, careful grip, like something in it was broken or pulled wrong. 2 of the humans were trembling slightly in the cold of the docking corridor. Veth Kal noted the trembling with detached interest. He had not adjusted the temperature for their comfort, and he had no plans to do so. His senior officers stood behind him along the observation walkway. A few Dominion dignitaries who had come aboard for a formal review of the station were also present. Among them a very old Theran diplomat named Orvath, who said very little and missed nothing. Veth Kal did not especially care what the old Theran thought of anything. He cared about results and appearance, and right now, this moment served both. He walked down to the processing floor. The guards brought the humans forward under bright white lights that made every bruise and cut and tired face easy to see. Veth Kal walked slowly along the line. He was taller than all of them by nearly half a body length, and his scaled green skin caught the light as he moved. He stopped in front of the man who was holding his arm. "What happened to it?" Veth Kal said in the common galactic tongue. Veth Kal looked at the arm and then looked at his aide. "Their bones break from simple falls, yes?" The aide confirmed this with a small nod. Veth Kal let out a short laugh through his nose. "And yet they sent these things to fight us. They broke inside their own ship before we even boarded." He said it loudly enough for his officers to hear, and several of them smiled or made the low clicking sound that passed for amusement among the Krethian officer class. He continued down the line. He paused at each human and said something dismissive about their size or their color or the softness of their skin. One woman near the middle of the line had red eyes from crying, and Veth Kal pointed at this and laughed openly. "They leak from their faces when they feel pain," he said to the dignitaries on the walkway above. "Not a stress signal, not a toxin release, just water, emotional water. They are so fragile that their feelings damage them physically." More laughter from the officers. Then he reached the last human in the line. She was not the tallest. She was not the most visibly injured. In fact, she showed no visible injury at all. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and her chin level, and she was looking directly at Veth Kal in a way that none of the others had. She was not glaring, she was not showing aggression. She was simply watching him the way someone watches a door they already know how to open. Her name was Sergeant Mara Delvin, and she said nothing. Veth Kal stopped in front of her. He looked her over and then looked at the stillness in her face. "This one does not tremble," he said to the room. He reached out and pressed the sharp edge of one claw into her forearm, hard enough to split the skin. A thin red line appeared. Her expression did not change. Her eyes did not move. He pressed harder. She did not flinch. She did not make a sound. She just kept watching his face, as if she was reading something written there that he could not see. He pulled his hand back. Something cold moved briefly through his chest, but he dismissed it immediately. He was not afraid of a human prisoner. He was a senior commander of the Galactic Dominion. He had destroyed ships. He had ended wars. Feel anything about a soft creature that stood still when poked? "Defiant," he said with a thin smile. Or perhaps just broken in a different way. He turned away from her, put them all in the stress cells, set the environment to maximum discomfort. I want to see how long the quiet one lasts. The guards moved the humans away. Up on the walkway, old Orvath, the Theran diplomat, had not laughed once during the whole display. He watched the last human, the still one, until she disappeared through the cell corridor door. Then he turned to his young aide and spoke so quietly that none of the Krethian officers near him could hear. Run a full biometric scan on that last prisoner, the one at the end of the line. Find her planet of origin, and bring me the Dominion database entry for it. Do it before you sleep tonight. The aide nodded and said, Is there something specific you are concerned about, Ambassador? Orvath watched the empty door for another moment. I am concerned that Commander Vethkal just pressed his claw into something he does not understand, he said. And I am more concerned that she let him do it. He clasped his hands behind his back and turned to leave. Down in the stress cell block, the guards activated the environmental controls. The room temperature dropped. The gravity simulation was pushed to 1.6 standard. The oxygen level was reduced just enough to make breathing feel slightly harder than normal. These conditions were designed to break the will of prisoners within hours. They had worked on every species the Dominion had ever used them on. Through the small observation port in her cell door, one of the guards looked in to check on the female prisoner at the end of the corridor. She was not lying on the floor in distress. She was doing push-ups. Slow, controlled, steady push-ups, with her face down and her breathing even. The guard watched for a long moment, and then stepped back from the port, and stood in the corridor with a strange feeling in his chest that he did not have a name for. He walked to the guard post, and sat down and did not look through the port again that night. In the processing room, above the empty floor, still held the marks of the humans having stood there, hummed. The station drifted slowly around the gas giant below. And somewhere in the Dominion database, a record was loading on a young aide's screen. A record flagged in deep red, with a warning banner across the top, that the aide had never seen applied to a sapient species before. He read the first line. Then he read it again. Then he got up and went to wake the ambassador. The aide's name was Preth, and he was 22 years old in Theran years, which was young enough that he had not yet seen very much in the way of truly frightening things. He had worked for Ambassador Orvath for 3 years, and in that time he had learned to take the old diplomat's concerns seriously. But when he pulled up the Dominion database entry for Mara Delvin's homeworld, he was not fully prepared for what he found. The planet was called Kepler 442b by the humans, and it had a different Dominion catalog number that was long and technical and meaningless. The important part was the flag. The record was tagged in deep red, the same color the Dominion used for uninhabitable radiation zones and active biological weapon sites. The banner read, Extreme Biological Hazard, Class 9 Deathworld, Approach with Full Containment Protocol. Preth sat back in his chair and read the rest. The atmosphere on Kepler 442b was almost 30% oxygen, which was far above the standard for life-supporting worlds. The gravity was 1.3 times standard. The temperature ranges swung from burning heat to killing cold within the same planetary cycle. The electromagnetic environment was unstable. The planet had been struck by large space objects multiple times in its history. Enough times to cause what the database called mass extinction events. Periods where most life on the surface had been destroyed. And then the life had come back. Every time the life had come back. Preth scrolled further. The section on native fauna was long and detailed and deeply unpleasant reading. There were creatures on Kepler 442b that were listed in the Dominion's threat database under their own separate entries. Animals with no intelligence, but enough physical capability that Dominion contact teams were instructed to avoid them entirely. There were things with 6 limbs and crushing jaw strength. There were things that could move faster than a Krethian soldier in full gear. There were things that hunted in coordinated groups and did not stop when injured. And the dominant sapient species, the humans, had evolved in the middle of all of it. They had not evolved somewhere safe. They had come up from the same violent environment as every other creature on that world. They had competed with apex predators for millions of years. They had survived ice ages. They had survived the extinction events, diseases and famines, and the full range of their planet trying to kill them. And they had come out the other side, not fragile, but something else entirely. Preth found the entry for wolves, the animal that Mara Delvin had apparently referenced when she spoke in the arena earlier that day. He had not understood the reference until now. A wolf was a large predatory pack animal native to Kepler 442b. The database noted it as a Class 3 threat organism, dangerous to approach, and then noted in the same entry that humans had domesticated wolves approximately 40,000 years ago, and that the domesticated version now lived inside human homes and was treated as a family member. Preth read that line 3 times. He went to wake the ambassador. Orvath listened to the summary without sitting up. He lay on his resting platform with his eyes on the ceiling and his hands folded on his chest, and he listened to every word Preth read aloud. When it was done, there was a long quiet. "There is more," Preth said. He found the entry section on human psychological and behavioral traits and read from it carefully. There was a word in the human language that had no clean translation into the galactic common tongue. The database described it as the willingness of a human to continue acting against their own survival or comfort purely to deprive an enemy of satisfaction. It had no survival function by standard biological models, but it appeared consistently across human history in wars and conflicts and personal confrontations. The database called it by the human word, spite. Orvath was quiet for another moment, then he got up. He walked to his communicator and opened a channel to Commander Vethkal's quarters. The commander answered after a delay, his voice heavy with irritation at being contacted at this hour. "Release the human woman," Orvath said without greeting. "The one at the end of the line. Release her, and do it before morning." Vethkal made a sound of dismissal. "Ambassador, you are a guest on my station. You do not give orders here." "I am not giving an order," Orvath said. "I am telling you the outcome of 2 paths. The first path is that you release her now, and this ends cleanly. The second path is that you do not release her, and you find out what a Class 9 Deathworld produces when it decides it is done being patient. I have read the file, Commander. I am asking you to read it before you choose." There was a pause on the line. Then Vethkal laughed. Not the large theatrical laugh from earlier, but a shorter, sharper sound that meant contempt. "She is in a stress cell. She is one prisoner. She is a small, soft mammal from a backwater planet that has not even reached full galactic contact status. You are frightened of a bruised woman in a locked room, Ambassador." The line closed. Orvath set down the communicator and looked at Preth. "Go to sleep," he said quietly. "Tomorrow will be very educational for everyone on this station." Down in the stress cells, the guards ran their hourly check. At cell 7, the observation port showed Mara still awake. She was sitting with her back against the wall, and her eyes moving slowly around the room. She was not looking at the walls or the ceiling. She was looking at the door hinges, the vent placement, the small wire that ran along the base of the far wall from the environmental control unit. She was looking at all of it the way a person looks at a problem they are already solving. In another cell down the corridor, her crewmate Jessen, the one with the dislocated shoulder, was lying on the bunk and breathing slowly. He had been in more pain than he showed on the processing floor, and right now the high gravity and the cold and the reduced air were making everything worse. But he had heard Mara's voice through the shared vent when the guards were away down the hall. She had said 3 words. "Stay ready, Jessen." Just 3 words. But the way she said them, calm and flat and certain, had made him feel something he had not felt since the Ardan Cross was hit. It was not hope exactly. It was something closer to the feeling of standing next to a very large and very reliable thing. He closed his eyes and let his breathing slow down the way she had taught all of them during training runs in the high-altitude sections of their deployment prep. Outside his cell, the guards made their rounds. The station continued its slow orbit of the gas giant below, and the stars outside the far viewport were very still, and the whole facility felt quiet, in the way that things feel quiet, right before they stop being quiet. The Dominion database entry for Kepler 442b was still open on Preth's screen in the ambassador's quarters, with the deep red flag burning in the corner of the display, and one final line in the behavioral notes section that Preth had not read aloud to Orvath, because he had not been sure what it meant. It said, "This species has a documented history of entering captivity deliberately in order to study an enemy from the inside." Preth read it again now, in the quiet of the room. Then he turned off the screen and sat in the dark for a while, thinking about the woman doing push-ups in a cell that was designed to make her collapse. Commander Vethkal woke the next morning in a good mood. He had decided overnight that the old Theran ambassador was simply overcautious, the trait of a diplomat who spent too much time reading files and not enough time in actual command. The humans were prisoners. They were injured. They were in a controlled environment on a station that was his from top to bottom. The situation was completely in hand. He decided to make use of it. The station had an arena floor on the lower level, a large open space that served for discipline demonstrations, training exercises, and occasionally entertainment for off-duty officers. He sent word to have the human prisoners brought down in the late morning. He also sent a handler to bring out one of the station's Grethhounds from the holding bay. The Grethhound was a standard Dominion discipline animal, a six-limbed predatory creature built for intimidation and pursuit. It stood nearly as tall as a Krethian soldier at the shoulder, and its body weight was somewhere around 200 kilograms. Its six-clawed feet made a distinctive sound on the metal floor when it walked, and every species that heard that sound for the first time reacted the same way. They stepped back, and their bodies went very still with fear. It was one of the most useful tools in the Dominion's handling kit for processing difficult prisoners. The humans were brought in and arranged along one wall. Vethkal stood at the center of the floor, with his officers on the elevated ring above, and several of the visiting dignitaries present as well. Orvath was there too, sitting very still with his hands in his lap, and his eyes already on Mara Delvin, who stood at the end of the human line as she had yesterday. "Today," Vethkal announced to the room in a carrying voice, "we will observe a simple demonstration. The purpose is to remind our guests of the nature of their situation and the nature of the Dominion's capability." He nodded to the handler. The Grethhound came through the side gate. The reaction from the other 7 humans was immediate and physical. Several of them pressed back against the wall. One made a sharp sound of fear. 2 others grabbed each other's arms without thinking. The animal's 6 feet hit the floor in a heavy rolling rhythm, and it lowered its wide flat head and let out the low resonant call that it used when it was preparing to charge. Then it fixed its 6 small yellow eyes on Mara Delvin. She did not move. The animal charged. It was fast, faster than it looked for something that heavy, and the distance between them closed in less than 2 seconds. The handler released the lead. The Grethhound hit the open floor at full speed with its leading limbs extended for the grab. Mara stepped to the side. It was not a dramatic leap. It was a single smooth step, just enough to take her out of the direct line of the charge. She caught the animal's lead left limb at the joint where it connected to the shoulder, not grabbing for the claws, but going for the structural point where the leverage was. And she used the animal's own weight and speed, the way a river uses a rock, letting the force redirect around a fixed point. The Grethhound's own momentum swung it sideways and down. She went with it to the floor, in one controlled motion, and used her body weight to press it flat. She got her arm across the base of its neck, not choking, but pinning, controlling the point where its own muscles were weakest in the extension, and she held it. The animal struggled for several seconds. It was strong, and it was angry, and it had never been put on the floor before in its life. It thrashed its remaining limbs against the metal and made sounds of outrage. She held it. She kept her breathing even and her grip precise, and she held it until it stopped thrashing and went still. She stayed over it for another full breath after that, to make sure. Then she stood up and stepped back. The Grethhound lay on the floor for a moment, and then rolled to its feet and back toward the handler. It did not look at Mara again. The arena was completely silent. Every officer on the ring above was still. Every dignitary had stopped moving. Vethkal stood at the center of the floor and felt something he could not immediately name move through him. It was not fear, he told himself. It was not fear, but it was something adjacent to it, something that lived in the same part of the chest. At him had spoke for the first time since capture. Her voice was calm and even, and the words came out like they were the most normal thing she had ever said. On my world, we do that with wolves, she said. We have been doing it for 40,000 years. The wolf is our friend now. Would you like to be our friend, Commander? Nobody laughed. One of the junior officers on the upper ring quietly began entering something into his personal device. Later, it would turn out to be a station transfer request. He submitted it before the day was over. Vethkal had the humans return to their cells. He did not speak for the rest of the morning. He sat in his command chair and looked at the empty floor below long after everyone else had left the arena level. The silence in the room had been a specific kind of silence. He had stood in front of crowds his whole career. He knew the difference between the quiet of an audience watching something ordinary and the quiet of an audience that had just seen something change their understanding of a situation. This had been the second kind. He reviewed the feed from the arena 4 times. Each time he watched the clip, he noted the same things. Her movement had not been defensive. It had not been reactive, in the way a frightened animal reacts. She had not stumbled. She had not grabbed and hoped. She had done something with structure and intention, something that looked practiced in the way that breathing looks practiced. He called his intelligence officer and asked for a full report on human combat history. The report came back 3 hours later and was 40 pages long. Vethkal read 6 pages and then put it down, not because it was not informative, but because it was too informative. Page 4 had a section about something the humans called endurance hunting, a hunting method where a human on foot would track a faster animal across open ground for hours or sometimes days. Not because the human was faster, but because the human would not stop. The animal would eventually overheat and collapse, and the human would still be walking. The section noted that this method had been used successfully against animals that were faster, stronger, and better armed than any human. He put the report down. He looked at his communicator, and then did not pick it up, calling Orvath, and he thought about what the Theron would say, and he thought about how it would feel to have that conversation. Instead, he sent a message to the cell block, increasing the gravity simulation to 1.8 standard. It was a decision he would think about later. Down in the cells, Mara felt the gravity increase and adjusted her posture without comment. She was sitting against the wall again, and she had been counting things. The environmental cycle was 50 minutes. She had confirmed that now. The guard rotation gap was 12 minutes. She had confirmed that. She had also confirmed the power flicker pattern. It happened every time the docking ring pressurized and the last 2 supply ships had arrived 18 hours apart. She looked at the wire along the base of the wall for a long time. Then, she began carefully working the edge of her bunk frame loose from its mounting bracket, using nothing but patience and the edge of her thumbnail, and the knowledge that every structure has a weak point if you are willing to take the time to find it. Mara spent the rest of that day being very quiet and very useful. She had already mapped the guard rotation in her head. 3 guards per block, rotating every 4 hours, with a 12-minute gap during shift change, when the corridor cam switched to the backup feed and ran 2 seconds behind real time. She had measured the environmental control cycle by feeling when the air pressure shifted slightly, once every 50 minutes. The door lock on her cell ran on the station's main power grid, and she had noticed during the arena walk that the main power flickered for exactly 1 second every time the docking ring pressurized for an arriving ship. She had also noticed, during her time on the arena floor, that the station's gravity plating was running at 1.8 standard by the end of the day. The stress setting pushed even higher after her performance, which meant any guard pursuing her would be working against gravity their bodies were not calibrated for. She was from a world with 1.3 standard gravity. She worked in 1.8, the way others worked in 1.0. Before lights out, she spoke quietly to the crew through the shared vent that connected cells 6 and 7. She did not give long explanations. She said 3 sentences. There will be a flicker in the lights during the next docking cycle. When it happens, the door lock resets for 1 second. Push the door hard inward at the exact moment, and keep moving toward the forward access corridor. Do not stop, and do not wait for me. She did not explain further. She trusted them. The bunk frame piece was in her hand, a flat metal edge about 20 centimeters long. She had been working it loose for 6 hours. She had also used the time to study the wire along the base of the wall, which connected to the cell block's environmental control unit. It was a simple feedback cable, and when she pulled it free and touched the stripped ends together in a specific sequence, it would do something interesting to the station's power distribution grid. Not break it, not damage it, just confuse it for long enough. 3 hours later, the docking alert sounded for an incoming supply ship. The lights flickered. 7 cell doors opened. The guards on shift were good at their jobs, but they were not ready for 8 humans who knew exactly where they were going in a gravity field bat. The humans handled better than they did. Mara went last. She moved through the corridor behind the crew and was not running. She was walking fast in a straight line, because running in high gravity draws attention and costs energy she did not want to spend yet. She redirected 2 guards by simply stepping out of a side doorway as they passed and speaking to them in a flat voice. The prisoners are in the lower access corridor. Your team called for support. Both guards turned and moved away without questioning it. The authority in her voice left no space for doubt. She reached the communications array on level 3. She did not contact the USEF. She did not send a rescue signal. She opened the array to the broadest available frequency, the Galactic Open Channel that every ship and station in the outer reach kept monitoring, and she broadcast 3 things: the crew's current coordinates, the Dominion fleet positions she had memorized from the navigation screen in the corridor outside the arena, and 1 short-spoken message. This is Sergeant Mara Delvin of the USEF frigate Ardan Cross. We are leaving this station now. Anyone who comes between us and the docking bay will have a very educational experience. She closed the array and connected the bunk frame piece to the communications relay in a way that was going to cause the navigation control system on the bridge to run a feedback loop for the next 4 hours. Then she walked to the docking bay. Meanwhile, Vethkal was woken from sleep by an alarm in his quarters. He arrived at the bridge already giving orders, only to find that the navigation controls were locked out. The entire system was running a feedback loop that overrode his command codes. He could not move the station. He could not send a pursuit signal without broadcasting his own position. He could not call for backup forces without admitting on the record that prisoners had escaped his custody. He stood at the console and pressed every override he knew. Nothing worked. The feedback loop had been built from the internal components of a standard crew bunk. A human crew bunk. Mara Delvin had taken it apart in her cell during the hours she was supposed to be breaking down under stress conditions, and she had built something new out of the pieces, and she had found a way to connect it to the station grid during her walk to the communications array. The thing she had built was simple in the way that the best traps are simple. It did one thing very well, and it was almost impossible to undo quickly. His systems officer said, "It is not a complicated device, Commander. It is in exactly the right place." Vethkal said nothing. The shuttle carrying 8 humans cleared the docking bay and moved away from the station at full burn. The long-range sensor tracked it for 11 minutes before it passed the range threshold and vanished from the display. Mara was the last one aboard. She stopped for 1 second at the bay door and looked up at the internal camera above it. She gave a single slow nod. Not a wave, not a smile, just a nod, the way you nod at someone when you want them to understand that you saw them the entire time. Then, the door closed. On the bridge, Vethkal watched the shuttle vanish from the sensor display, and felt the feedback loop still running in his console, and understood for the first time in his long decorated career what it felt like to be the thing that had made a very serious and irreversible mistake. His intelligence officer was standing behind him and said very quietly, "The broadcast went on the open channel, Commander. Every ship in the sector heard it." Vethkal did not respond. He looked at the empty sensor display for a long time. Then he sat down in his command chair and did not move for quite a while, and the only sound on the bridge was the quiet hum of a feedback loop doing exactly what it was built to do. The broadcast went everywhere. That was the part that could not be undone. Every ship in the outer reach sector heard it. Every station monitoring the open channel logged it. Within 48 hours, it had been forwarded through fleet networks and diplomatic relays to 16 different species across the Dominion's outer territories. The name Mara Delvin appeared in 6 separate intelligence reports before she had even reached a safe port. The Dominion High Council did not call Vethkal to answer for losing the prisoners. They called him to answer for the broadcast. They were not angry in the loud way. They were angry in the quiet way, which was much worse. They asked him to explain how a single human prisoner had locked him out of his own station's navigation systems, built a functional override device from a bunk frame, broadcast Dominion fleet positions on an open channel, and walked out with her entire crew. He did not have a good answer. The political fallout took the shape of a forced diplomatic review. A joint tribunal was convened on a neutral Theron station 7 days after the escape. The Dominion needed to demonstrate that it took the incident seriously. The Human Diplomatic Corps, small and still building its presence in the outer territories, was invited to send a representative witness. They sent Mara Delvin, in a clean USEF dress uniform, with her insignia straight and her hair pulled back, and she sat down across a long table from a panel of Dominion and Theron representatives and waited for the session to open. Vethkal was seated at the far end of the same table. He did not look at her when she entered. He had spent the 7 days since the escape preparing arguments. He had rehearsed defenses. He had consulted legal advisors. He had even, in a private moment he would never admit to anyone, practiced what he would say if the tribunal required him to make a formal apology, because he suspected he might have to, and he wanted the words ready. What he was not prepared for was the document Mara Delvin placed on the table when it was her turn to speak. She had written a formal witness statement, and she read it aloud in the same flat, clear voice she had used in the arena. It was long. It was specific. It named every member of her crew and the injuries they had arrived with, and the injuries added during detention. It described the stress cell conditions in measurable terms: the temperature, the gravity setting, the oxygen reduction, and the duration. The taunting on the processing floor was described in precise order, including the moment Vethkal pressed his claw into her arm, and the exact depth of the cut, and the fact that medical treatment was not offered. She described all of it without any emotion in her voice and without any exaggeration. She simply told what happened in the order it happened. The room was very quiet. Then she came to her recommendation section. She recommended leniency for Vethkal. Not pardon, not erasure of record, but leniency. She did not call for his removal from service. She did not ask for punitive action beyond a formal reprimand. She said in words that she had chosen with care, that she did not believe her sense of safety or her crew's recovery required his suffering. She said that what was needed was structural change, a formal Dominion policy update on the treatment of human prisoners, a biological classification amendment so that human detainees would be processed under appropriate threat assessment protocols going forward, and a standing review mechanism for Deathworld sapient species contact procedures. She said none of this with satisfaction. She said it the way an engineer describes a repair plan. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for another moment. Then Vethkal spoke. He had not planned to speak directly to her. He had planned to address the panel only, but the words came out before the plan caught up to them, and he heard himself ask the question that had been sitting in his chest since the moment the shuttle cleared his docking bay. "Why," he said, "after all of it, why would you do this? Why not ask for what you could have asked for?" Mara looked at him. The same look from the processing floor, the same look from the arena, the same steady, unhurried reading look that had no anger in it and no performance of strength in it, just complete calm attention. "Because I am from the Deathworld," she said, "and people from Deathworlds learn something early that takes other species a long time to understand. The most dangerous thing we ever did was not learning how to fight. We have always known how to fight. The most dangerous thing we ever did was learning when not to." She looked back at the panel and indicated that her statement was complete. The tribunal record shows that the formal outcome was a reprimand for Vethkal and an amendment to Dominion prisoner processing protocols for Class 7 and above Deathworld sapient species. The amendment was named informally in diplomatic circles after the station where the incident occurred. 3 months after the tribunal, Vethkal submitted a formal request to be reassigned away from all human contact zones. His official stated reason was recorded as Threat Assessment Framework Incompatible with Prior Command Training. Ambassador Orvoth read the reassignment notice in his office on the Theron home station. He read it once, and then set it down, and allowed himself the small, quiet smile of a person who had seen exactly what they expected to see. His aide Preth was at the desk across from him, reading the same document. "She could have ended his career," Preth said. "She had everything she needed." "Yes," Orvoth said. "Why didn't she?" Orvoth thought about the still woman at the end of the prisoner line. He thought about the push-ups in the stress cell. He thought about the nod at the camera. He folded the notice and set it in the completed file. "Because ending his career was the easy thing," he said. "And nothing about that woman suggests she does the easy thing when there is a better option available." He closed the file. Outside the station window, the stars were very far away and very still, and the galaxy continued turning in the same slow, vast way it always had, indifferent to commanders and prisoners and tribunals and the names of small creatures from dangerous worlds. But somewhere in the Dominion's updated database, a new entry had been added to the human species record. It was not under the biology section or the threat assessment section. It was in the diplomatic notes. It said simply, "Do not make an enemy of these people. They will give you the chance to be something better instead, and that is the thing you should actually be afraid of." Mara Delvin returned to active duty 2 weeks after the tribunal. She was promoted to staff sergeant and assigned back to the Outer Reach. A new crew and a new ship, smaller than the Arden Cross but faster. She did not request any ceremonial recognition. She did not give any speeches. She filed her assignment paperwork, checked her crew's readiness, and on the first day out, she ran them through a full decompression drill at 1.4 gravity with the lights off. When they asked her why the lights, she said, "Because the dark is not the dangerous part. The dangerous part is forgetting that you already know how to move in it." Nobody asked follow-up questions. The ship left port on schedule and headed back toward the Outer Reach, and the wide quiet between the stars, where things were still being decided, and the galaxy was still learning what it meant that humans had arrived in it, not as guests and not as conquerors, but as something that had no good category yet. Something that had survived a death world. Something that had looked at the universe and decided to give it the benefit of the doubt at least once.